From the depths of space, the Gorthal Empire observed Earth with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. Commander Vrex stood on the bridge of the Abyssal Dawn, a towering warship capable of razing entire cities with a single blast. His thin, calculating eyes studied the data feeds that flooded in from dozens of scouts deployed to Earth's orbit. From their vantage point, the planet looked ripe for conquest, its cities gleaming, its resources abundant, and its technology, by their standards, primitive. "We've watched this planet for years, Commander," Dr. Melia Roskov, the lead strategist of the Gorthal Intelligence Division, said from the console beside him. She had been closely monitoring Earth's progress for the last few cycles, mapping out its military capabilities. They've barely reached the age of intercontinental flight, and their most advanced weapons are primitive missiles and clunky spacecraft. There is no sign of any planetary defense systems that could challenge us. Vrex nodded, his sharp features betraying little emotion. The Gorthal had encountered countless worlds, each one falling in line with the Empire's orders or suffering swift annihilation. Earth, however, posed an unusual puzzle. Its citizens, though technologically backwards, seemed to have no desire for domination. They focused on petty internal conflicts, squabbling over borders, resources, and ideologies. For Vrex, this suggested a lack of focus, a fractured species that could be easily subdued. "Are you certain there's nothing of value here?" Vrex asked, his voice low but commanding. Dr. Ruskov studied the data feeds more closely. There are anomalies. Some human innovations have shown surprising potential. Their aerospace capabilities are more advanced than expected for a species that hasn't yet mastered artificial intelligence. Still, their tech is disorganized, inefficient. We could wipe out their satellites in a matter of hours and disable any semblance of a defense before they even know what's happening. That's the point, isn't it? Vrex murmured, glancing out the massive viewport of the ship, watching Earth spin in its delicate orbit. "We strike hard, fast, and they'll be too overwhelmed to mount any meaningful resistance." The plan was simple. A quick orbital bombardment to disable Earth's military satellites, a few surgical strikes on key military bases and power stations, and then they would deploy the ground forces. The Gorthal Empire was known for its ability to quash rebellions before they even began, and from their observations, Earth's military, fragmented and technologically inferior, would be no different. "What about their leaders?" Dr. Roskov asked, frowning as she scanned Earth's political data. Vrex smirked, a thin, cruel expression. "They'll fall in line, as all weaklings do. Their unity is an illusion. We'll shatter it quickly enough." As the final coordinates were inputted and the countdown began, the Gorthal prepared for what they believed would be a swift and easy conquest. But in the depths of their arrogance, they had overlooked one critical detail. They had underestimated the human spirit, and it would be their downfall. The first salvo from the Gorthal Empire came without warning, and within hours, Earth was plunged into chaos. Across the world, city skylines were blotted out by the sudden arrival of massive warships. Each alien vessel was larger than any building on Earth, their hulls gleaming with a terrifying, otherworldly design. From these ships, automated drones and fighters launched in perfect synchronization, swooping through Earth's atmosphere and disabling satellites with pinpoint accuracy. In New York, people looked up in awe, then in terror, as the sky seemed to darken with the arrival of the fleet. Cars screeched to a halt on the streets, drivers abandoning their vehicles as an overwhelming sense of panic began to spread. News anchors, their faces pale with fear, barely kept their composure as they read off government emergency alerts. But among the panic, there was also a strange sense of calm. President Sam Hayes stood in the White House Situation Room, flanked by his most trusted advisors, including General Olivia Blake and Secretary of Defense William Carter. Hayes, a man known for his calm demeanor under pressure, wasn't the type to show fear. He watched the live footage from New York and London, the alien ships hanging like malevolent moons over the cities, but his expression remained resolute. "We can't waste time," Hayes said firmly. "We're going to show them that we're not going to lie down for them." Blake, a seasoned military leader, nodded. "The global military infrastructure is fractured, but the people won't be. We have the capacity to organize. Fast." A surge of communication lines flickered to life, and within minutes, emergency broadcasts were sent out to every corner of the planet. The message was simple, unified, and echoed across every major city: resist. For the first time in human history, nations set aside their differences. The United States began coordinating with Russia, China, and even smaller nations, all working together to mount a counteroffensive. It wasn't about military might. Not yet. It was about defiance. In Chicago, a group of engineers and mechanics who'd been laid off from the automotive industry in recent months found themselves working around the clock to repurpose old military surplus vehicles. With little more than welding equipment and scrap metal, they turned an old Jeep into an armored transport. It wasn't advanced technology, but it was functional, and it was a symbol of their refusal to bow to the alien invaders. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, a group of hackers from the tech community managed to infiltrate a few of the alien drones, temporarily disabling their communication systems. The public, initially frozen in fear, found new hope as images of human resistance began flooding the airwaves. The aliens had not anticipated this. They assumed Earth's population would scatter, disorganized, and helpless. But they were wrong. In the Gorthal flagship, Commander Vrex watched the live feed of human resistance unfold, his face twisting with disbelief. "How is this possible?" he muttered under his breath. "They should be running, hiding." Dr. Ruskov stood behind him, her voice cold. "It seems, Commander, that they do not intend to surrender." Vrex's eyes narrowed. His patience was wearing thin. "Then let's show them why they should have." As the Gorthal forces pressed their advantage, expecting to crush Earth's meager attempts at resistance, they were met with something entirely unexpected: the human resolve. Frantic, yes, but not disorganized, grew in strength as the days passed. Cities that had been struck by alien bombardments were already seeing signs of life again. People weren't hiding in fear. They were rebuilding, adapting, and striking back in ways the Gorthal had never anticipated. In the ruins of Boston, a small group of former military and civilian engineers had converted old construction equipment into crude weapons platforms, attaching alien weapons scavenged from downed drones. They launched hit-and-run attacks on the Gorthal supply lines, disrupting their ability to maintain control over critical infrastructure. These small, seemingly insignificant efforts were enough to make the invaders pause, to cause them to question their understanding of Earth. Commander Vrex seethed from the command deck of the Abyssal Dawn as his fleet's battle plan began to unravel. Reports were flooding in of human counterattacks everywhere, from the Amazon rainforest to the streets of Paris. Earth's cities, it seemed, were far from defenseless. They were evolving rapidly, and the people were using their knowledge of the land to counter the invaders' superior technology. "What is happening?" Vrex demanded, turning to Dr. Ruskov, who had been analyzing human military tactics. "They're not following any standard military doctrine, Commander," Ruskov replied, her voice tinged with disbelief. "They've adapted in ways we don't understand. It's almost like they're learning as they go. Every time we strike, they find a way to turn it against us." In Washington, President Hayes addressed the nation once more, his voice broadcast across the globe. "We are not a people who run from a fight. We are not a people who surrender. The time for fear is over. We fight, not with the technology they have, but with what we are: unpredictable, relentless, and unbreakable." The world, united in fear, found itself united in defiance. Governments that once operated in isolation now shared resources, military assets, and intelligence. Communications networks previously thought insecure became invaluable, as humans used their knowledge of information systems to coordinate in ways that baffled the Gorthal. In a surprising turn, Ordinary citizens began to organize themselves into small, highly effective units. A group of teenagers in Houston, with no formal training in combat, managed to hack into an alien communications satellite and broadcast a fake distress signal, luring Gorthal fighters into an ambush. They'd only used rudimentary tech, but it worked, destroying a squadron of alien drones before they could retaliate. On the alien command ship, the walls seemed to close in on Vrex. His military might, honed over millennia of conquest, was faltering. "How are they doing this?" he muttered, staring at the growing list of human victories. The humans were not just fighting back. They were turning the tide. The Gorthal had underestimated the one thing they had not accounted for: the ingenuity of a species backed into a corner. "Prepare the ground forces," Vrex ordered, his voice growing hard. "We'll need to crush them once and for all." But as he spoke, he could feel a creeping sense of doubt settle in. This wouldn't be as easy as he had thought. The Gorthal had underestimated Earth in more ways than one. Commander Vrex watched helplessly as the situation on the ground grew more chaotic. Earth's resistance, once dismissed as a mere annoyance, had become a relentless force that couldn't be stamped out as easily as he had expected. The first sign of serious trouble came in the city of Atlanta, where a group of former military engineers had repurposed Gorthal technology, advanced alien drones that had crashed during the initial bombardment, and turned them against their creators. The newly reprogrammed drones, outfitted with makeshift weapons, began attacking the Gorthal's armored transports. The alien soldiers, highly trained but unable to anticipate such resourcefulness, were caught off guard. The drones didn't follow predictable patterns of behavior. They adapted, learning from each encounter, and were now attacking in swarms, forcing the invaders to retreat. "What in the void is going on down there?" Vrex demanded, his face twisted in fury as reports of alien casualties mounted. "How are they using our own technology against us?" Dr. Ruskov was at his side, studying the data feeds with a grim expression. "It's not just their use of technology, Commander. It's their ability to adapt. We've seen reports of civilian groups using rudimentary tools to sabotage our ground units. It's uncanny. It's as if they've been anticipating our every move." Vrex's eyes flashed with frustration. Anticipating our moves. The thought was almost laughable. Earth was supposed to be a planet of uncoordinated factions, stuck in petty internal struggles. Yet here they were, facing an enemy who seemed to know how to exploit every weakness in their strategy. In the streets of Paris, another example of human ingenuity became apparent. Local civilians, who had initially been fearful and scattered, had quickly learned to use the environment against the Gorthal. Using the urban layout to their advantage, they set traps and ambushes, forcing the Gorthal forces into isolated pockets. A group of engineers had even managed to rig the city's abandoned subway system with alien explosives, causing massive delays for the invaders and crippling their ability to move troops efficiently. In every city, it was the same. Humanity was not only surviving, they were making the Gorthal pay for their arrogance. Vrex paced across the bridge, his mind racing. This was no longer just a military operation. It was a battle of wills. The humans, he realized, weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting with a purpose, fueled by something the Gorthal had failed to account for: desperation combined with an almost animal-like cunning. "They've learned our patterns," Vrex said, his voice low with realization. "But they've also adapted. They're no longer just reacting to us. They're making the fight unpredictable. It's as if they're anticipating our next move before we make it." Dr. Ruskov nodded. "They're adapting faster than we can counter. If this continues, we'll lose control of the entire operation." Vrex clenched his fists, a cold fury beginning to bubble within him. "Then we will have to change the game." He turned to his command officers, a dark look in his eyes. "Prepare the full assault. If they want a war, we'll give them one they can't win." But even as he spoke, he couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in the pit of his stomach, the nagging sense that, Despite their overwhelming firepower, the Gorthal might be facing a force they couldn't understand, let alone defeat. The Gorthal forces had suffered a string of defeats, each more humiliating than the last. Their advanced weaponry, once thought to be invincible, was now being outmaneuvered by a planet they had written off as weak. Commander Vrex's pride had taken a severe blow, and his frustration was palpable. As his fleet continued to be repelled by Earth's growing resistance, he ordered Dr. Roscoe to conduct a full-scale analysis of human behavior, hoping to find an explanation for the unexpected resilience of their adversaries. For days, Dr. Roscoe pored over data from every skirmish, every intercepted transmission, every piece of intelligence she could gather. It was only after the 100th report from their surveillance teams, analyzing the intricacies of human survival tactics, that the truth became clear. The findings sent a chill down her spine. "Commander," she said, turning to Vrex with a grave expression, "I think I finally understand why we're failing." Vrex, his patience worn thin, fixed her with a sharp gaze. "Go on." Dr. Ruskov held up a tablet displaying a series of complex human psychological patterns. It's not just their technology or their numbers. It's their mindset. Human beings, they're not just fighting for survival. They're fighting because their survival instincts are hardwired into them in ways that no species we've encountered before can match. Vrex frowned, confused. "You're telling me that they're more resilient than we thought. That's not new. But they're still weak, aren't they?" "No," Dr. Roskov replied, a tremor of disbelief in her voice. "That's the problem. Their weakness is what makes them so dangerous. It's their relentless capacity to innovate, adapt, and overcome. Every time we strike, they don't just defend, they evolve. They've been doing it for centuries, and we've never noticed. Their technological development has been intentionally stunted. They've been holding back." Vrex's confusion deepened. "Holding back? What do you mean?" Dr. Roskov scrolled through a timeline of human technological progress. Humans have purposefully limited their advancement in certain fields, particularly in areas of artificial intelligence, spacefaring technology, and weaponry. They've kept their true potential hidden, developing only enough to survive their own internal struggles, but never pushing their boundaries too far. Vrex's face twisted in disbelief. Why would they do that? Why limit their own power? Dr. Roskov looked up, her expression grim. Because they've known, on some level, that they would be discovered. They'd been preparing for this moment. They knew that eventually someone would come looking for easy pickings. They wanted to remain beneath the radar, to appear weak, because they knew that if anyone found out what they were capable of, they would be a target. But now, when we force them into a corner, they're unleashing their full potential. The realization hit Vrex like a blow to the chest. Earth's greatest weapon wasn't its military, its resources, or its technology. It was the human spirit, a force so unpredictable and resourceful that the Gorthal had no way of understanding it. This wasn't just a war, it was a test of will. And the humans had been preparing for it all along. Vrex turned to his officers, his voice cold with a newfound understanding. "This isn't just about winning anymore, it's about survival. We need to change our strategy. Now." The Gorthal Empire was reeling, its once unshakable confidence now fractured. Commander Vrex's mind raced as he mulled over the staggering revelation from Dr. Roskov. The humans weren't just fighting. They were unleashing a level of unpredictability that had confounded even the most advanced alien minds. Vrex had assumed their superior technology would be enough to crush Earth, but now he saw he was facing something far more insidious, an entire species that had been evolving, not just technologically, but mentally and emotionally, for the sole purpose of defending their home. And that, he realized with growing dread, made them an enemy unlike any the Gorthal had ever encountered. In the heart of Washington, President Sam Hayes stood at a podium, his face resolute as he addressed the world. His voice carried through the broadcasts with a quiet, ironclad authority that had become emblematic of the new human resolve. To our citizens, to our allies, and to those who believed we would fall, we will not surrender. We will not yield. What our invaders underestimated is that we, as humans, are more than just survivors. We are creators. We are innovators. And together, we will turn this tide. As he spoke, the international coalition formed under his leadership began to coalesce into a unified force. Earth's most advanced minds, from scientists and engineers to soldiers and hackers, worked around the clock, designing new strategies and technologies with unprecedented speed. The human race was no longer just reacting to the Gorthal threat. It was shaping the battlefield. In Tokyo, a group of underground engineers unveiled a new weapon, one based on Gorthal technology they had secretly reverse-engineered from down drones. The weapon wasn't the typical high-powered laser or plasma cannon. No, it was far simpler and far more dangerous. They had taken the alien energy shields that had once made their attackers nearly invulnerable and turned them into energy disruptors that could disable the aliens' advanced weaponry and machinery. The first time a Gorthal heavy assault vehicle was hit by one of these devices, the result was catastrophic. The vehicle, designed to absorb tremendous amounts of damage, was disabled in seconds. Its weapons systems malfunctioned, and its armor melted under the heat of its own weapons fire. It was a game changer, a small victory, yes, but a crucial one. As the human resistance spread across the globe, reports of similar breakthroughs followed. New tactics, new technologies, new methods of sabotage. The world was not just fighting to survive, they were fighting to win. Earth's greatest strength was its capacity to adapt under pressure, and now, the invaders were beginning to realize that their superior technology was no match for humanity's creative genius. On the Abyssal Dawn, Vrex was losing control. His ships had been attacked in ways that defied all logic, his troops outmaneuvered by guerrilla fighters using primitive methods. As each failed mission report came in, his anger boiled over. "They're learning faster than we can kill them," Vrex snarled, slamming his fist against the command console. "I should have known it would come to this." Dr. Roskov stood at his side, studying the latest data. "It's not just their will to survive, Commander," she said, her voice steady but full of concern. "It's their capacity to innovate. They're evolving, not just in their tactics, but in their technology. We can no longer count on brute force alone." Vrex's gaze turned cold. "Then we fight fire with fire. Prepare the ground invasion. We will crush them where they stand. It's time to end this." But as Vrex gave the orders, a gnawing doubt lingered in his mind. Could brute force really win this war, or had they already reached the point of no return? The tipping point had arrived, and it was no longer a question of whether Earth could survive, but whether the Gorthal could. The Gorthal had underestimated Earth in every way. But now, as they prepared to launch their final assault, Commander Vrex's uncertainty reached its peak. The human resistance had proven resilient, unpredictably so. And with each passing day, the humans adapted faster, fought harder, and waged war in ways that rendered the Gorthal's strategies useless. Vrex stood at the helm of the Abyssal Dawn, his hands clenched into fists as he watched the growing tide of resistance from his command chair. Reports of coordinated attacks, new human weaponry, and civilian sabotage flooded in from every front. Earth's population had united like never before, each nation, each group, contributing whatever they could to the war effort. The humans were no longer simply surviving. They were winning. In Europe, citizens had taken to the streets with makeshift weapons, sabotaging alien supply lines and infrastructure with guerrilla tactics that left the Gorthal forces reeling. In Africa, small groups of farmers and former soldiers had built rudimentary but effective weapon caches and traps, turning the vast, open deserts into deadly mazes for Gorthal invaders. Across Asia, high-tech hackers crippled the invaders' communication networks, sending misinformation that divided their ranks. Every attempt to regain control seemed to only make the situation worse. Back in Washington, President Sam Hayes addressed the world for the third time since the initial invasion, his speech broadcast in real time across every major network. The fear and panic that had once consumed the global populace had transformed into a steely resolve, a collective force determined to drive the invaders off their planet. "We are not just defending our homes, our families, or our nations," Hayes said, his voice firm and unwavering. "We are fighting for our future, for our children, for all of humanity, and we will not let our world fall." The unity in his voice was palpable. The world stood behind him now, not just as a symbol of defiance, but as a global leader in the resistance against the Gorthal. It wasn't just about military power anymore. It was about humanity's indomitable will. On the abyssal dawn, Vrex watched with growing unease as the images of human resilience flooded his screens. He had calculated the odds. The numbers had been in his favor, until now. The tactics, the technology, the sheer unpredictability of the humans, they were all factors he hadn't anticipated. His frustration gave way to something darker. This war was no longer just about resources. It was personal. The Gorthal Empire had never been bested before, and the idea of being outsmarted by a species they had written off as primitive filled him with rage. "We're going in," Vrex muttered. "Prepare the ground forces. If we must, we'll level their cities to break their spirit." But even as he issued the command, a quiet thought lingered in his mind. Could they truly win this? Could the Gorthal break Earth's will, or had they already lost? The time for subtlety was over. The final invasion was coming. And with it, Earth would either fall, or prove that its greatest strength wasn't in technology, but in its capacity to fight back against impossible odds. The ground invasion had begun. Gorthal troops, armored and brutal, descended in full force on Earth's most heavily populated cities. The abyssal dawn released wave after wave of drop pods, filled with elite soldiers, drones, and heavy machinery designed to crush resistance in minutes. They came down like a storm, smashing through cities like New York, London, and Tokyo, hoping to finally break the human will. Vrex's orders were clear: obliterate everything. Let humanity see what it meant to defy the Gorthal Empire. But once again, the humans proved they were not what Vrex had expected. As the first wave of Gorthal troops stormed the streets of New York, they were met not with terror or surrender, but with an organized, unrelenting resistance. The city had been transformed in just a matter of weeks. The human ingenuity that had so stunned the Gorthal was now on full display. Construction vehicles, once meant for building, were turned into mobile armored fortresses. Old military tanks, scavenged from museums and scrapyards, were retrofitted with new energy disruptor weapons. And the people, ordinary civilians, had become fighters. Teachers, shopkeepers, and engineers had all taken up arms. They fought as one, because they had no choice. As Gorthal soldiers stormed through Manhattan, they found their way blocked at every turn. Streets were rigged with explosives. Old subway tunnels had become ambush points, and buildings once thought to be weak against alien weaponry now stood as fortresses. The humans had used every inch of their environment to their advantage, making the Gorthal's overwhelming numbers seem less and less significant. In London, the Gorthal ground forces were ambushed in the fog of war, a perfect environment for the human guerrillas who had spent weeks setting traps. Using their knowledge of the city's terrain, humans lured the invaders into narrow streets and alleys, where they fired from every window, every rooftop, and every corner. For every Gorthal soldier who advanced, 2 were left behind. The human will was unmistakable and unyielding. Back in Washington, President Hayes was at the heart of the defense efforts, coordinating the international counteroffensive. But even as the situation seemed dire, as reports of alien casualties mounted, he knew that Earth's victory was not yet guaranteed. The Gorthal were relentless. And yet, even in the darkest moments, Hayes could feel something shifting in the atmosphere. On the abyssal dawn, Vrex watched the devastation unfold, his face a mask of fury. His fleet had already suffered damage from the human counterattacks, but the ground forces were still formidable. Yet, something gnawed at him, He had underestimated humanity's resolve before, and he could feel it now more than ever. Their strength came not from their technology, but from their spirit. As the final Gorthal forces launched a last-ditch push toward Washington, Vrex hesitated, a flicker of doubt creeping into his mind. He ordered the retreat, the thought gnawing at him with bitter irony. We've lost. In the streets of New York, as dawn broke over a battered but standing city, the humans cheered, not out of joy, but out of survival. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The Gorthal Empire had been repelled, Earth had survived, and proven to the stars that humanity was anything but defenseless. It wasn't just the invaders who had learned something. Earth had shown the universe that no matter the odds, no matter the force brought against them, humanity would always fight back and never, ever give up.